Blood streaked down 16-year-old Zora Jackson's wrists as Officer Reeves tightened the cuffs, laughing at her claim her mother was Delta Force. Mall staff smirked, a crowd whispered, and humiliation cut deeper than metal. Then the glass doors slid open, and a figure stepped in whose very presence promised that everything was about to change. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story that you won't want to miss. The morning sun stretched across the quiet Atlanta suburb where 16-year-old Zora Jackson lived with her mother. It was a Saturday, a rare day she had promised herself would be focused on nothing but her science project. She stood in her small but neatly ordered bedroom, surrounded by textbooks, notebooks, and the carefully folded shopping list she had written out the night before. Every item had a purpose. Every detail of the list had been double-checked. That was Zora, thorough, focused, determined to be prepared. She hummed softly under her breath, the kind of tune that rose when her mind was set on something important. The NASA t-shirt she wore hung a little loose, the cotton worn from years of being her favorite. The letters across her chest were more than decoration. For Zora, they were a statement of who she wanted to be. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, maybe even a researcher, someone who could use science to change the world. At school, teachers described her as gifted, a student who carried herself with a quiet confidence that demanded respect. But she also knew that confidence alone didn't shield her from the world outside. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, words she had heard since she was a little girl. "Dignity is your armor, baby. Carry it with you wherever you go." Zora carried those words into every classroom, every store, every space where she felt eyes on her. It wasn't just advice, it was survival. She checked her backpack twice before leaving her room. Inside were her notebooks, her school ID, and a folder where she kept certificates her grandmother insisted she hold on to, reminders of what she had already accomplished: perfect attendance, science fair finalist, debate team captain. Each paper was more than proof of work, it was proof of character. By the time she left the house, the neighborhood was already alive with the sound of lawnmowers and children playing. Zora walked to the bus stop, head high, the list clutched in her hand. Today, she needed to find small solar panels, wiring, and a few electronic components. Electromax, the high-end electronics store inside Westfield Mall, was the only place she could find everything in one trip. The plan was simple: get the supplies, head home, and spend the rest of the afternoon assembling the project. Nothing about the day seemed unusual. Nothing hinted at how quickly her life was about to change. The bus ride was short, only 20 minutes from her neighborhood to the sprawling shopping center. Zora pressed her forehead lightly to the glass as she watched the landscape shift from modest homes to gleaming storefronts and polished parking lots. Her heart beat with the quiet rhythm of anticipation. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind: walk in, buy what she needed, and leave unnoticed. That was the hope. But as the mall came into view, the thought that always sat heavy in her chest returned. Hope did not always protect her from reality. The sliding glass doors of Westfield Mall opened with a rush of cool air as Zora stepped inside. Bright sunlight spilled through the high skylights, bouncing off the polished tile floors. It was the kind of place designed to make shoppers feel safe and comfortable, a space meant to symbolize opportunity. But Zora saw something else. Two security guards leaned against the rail near the food court entrance. Their eyes flicked toward her, not for long, just enough to register suspicion. She felt the shift immediately, the unspoken question hanging in their gaze. What is she doing here? Zora squared her shoulders, repeating the mantra that steadied her. Dignity is your armor. She walked deliberately, not too fast, not too slow, blending in with the steady stream of shoppers. Families laughed near the ice cream stand. Teenagers clustered around the sneaker shop. Everything looked normal, but the undercurrent of judgment followed her step by step. She paused near the mall directory to make sure she was heading in the right direction. The glowing map pointed her to Electromax, nestled between a luxury clothing boutique and a jewelry store. She adjusted the strap of her backpack and walked with purpose, rehearsing the polite phrases she always used in stores like this. "Excuse me, I am looking for this part. It is for a school project." She had learned to soften her presence, to explain herself before being questioned. Electromax looked like a temple of technology, filled with bright displays of the newest phones and sleek rows of electronics. Zora entered quietly, scanning the aisles. She found the section with small solar panels almost immediately. Relief touched her face. Maybe this would be easier than she feared. She picked up a panel, turned it carefully in her hand and compared it to her list. But her sense of calm fractured when she noticed the store clerk. A middle-aged white man with thinning hair and a frown that looked permanent had started to follow her movements. He straightened items she had not touched. He hovered at the end of the aisle. His questions came sharp, one after another. "Are you planning to buy something? Do you know what that costs?" Zora answered politely, showing her list. Holding up her school ID. "This is for my AP chemistry project," she explained. "I need solar components for an experiment." The clerk's expression never softened. His eyes scanned her, as if her words carried no weight. Zora ignored the knot in her stomach and continued browsing. She carefully placed wires into her basket, then a small toolkit. Her breathing was steady, but each second under his gaze felt like a test. Then came the shout that cracked the air like glass breaking. "My phone is gone!" A woman's voice, sharp and frantic, cut through the background music. Heads turned toward the display near the entrance. A woman in designer clothes, Karen Thompson, clutched her handbag and pointed a trembling finger. "My brand new iPhone! It's missing!" And then her eyes locked on Zora. It was her. She's been lurking around here the whole time. The store froze in silence. Dozens of eyes swung towards Zora, as if Karen's accusation alone was enough to convict her. Zora's breath caught in her chest. She shook her head slowly, carefully. "No, that's not true. I didn't take anything. You can check my bag." But her words drowned in the sudden rush of judgment. The clerk nodded quickly to Karen, as if relieved to have someone to target. "Don't worry, ma'am, we'll handle this." He signaled toward the back of the store. Two mall security guards appeared almost instantly, as though they had been waiting for this moment. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his buzz cut severe. The other was younger, nervous, but his grip was no less firm when they seized her arms. Zora tried to explain again, her voice calm but urgent. "I am here for a school project. I can show you my shopping list. Please, just check the cameras." Neither man listened. Their hands tightened around her arms, pulling painfully against her shoulders. "Got another one trying to boost electronics," the older guard muttered into his radio. "We're taking her to the office." The humiliation stung sharper than the pain. Every shopper in the store stared as the guards forced her forward. A child clutched his mother's hand. A group of teenagers lifted their phones, recording. Zora lowered her head, heat flooding her cheeks. She had studied too hard, dreamed too much, worked too carefully to be reduced to this moment. As they marched her through the mall, the world blurred. She caught flashes of laughter from a food court table, a whisper carried behind her, another one stealing. She wanted to scream, but the lessons from her grandmother pressed down harder. Dignity is your armor. Do not give them more reason to twist the story. The cuffs clicked into place around her wrists before she fully realized what was happening. The metal cut into her skin instantly, too tight, unforgiving. She winced but said nothing. Blood began to bead along her wrists, dripping slowly as the guards pulled her toward the security office. A girl she recognized from school stood frozen near the pretzel stand, eyes wide, phone in hand. Zora forced herself to meet her gaze, as if to say, "Remember this. Remember what they are doing to me." The girl lifted the phone higher. The red light of the recording camera blinked. Every step felt like a lifetime. Every stare like a weight added to her back. By the time they reached the small, windowless security office, Zora knew one thing with unshakable certainty. Whatever happened next, she would not let this moment break her. She would not let their prejudice erase who she was. But she also knew she could not face it alone. Her wrists bled, her dignity burned, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet resolve began to form. If the world insisted on seeing her as guilty, then it would have to reckon with the truth. Because she was not just Zora Jackson, she was the daughter of Colonel Vanessa Jackson, and when her mother arrived, everything would change. The security office door shut behind Zora with a heavy thud that seemed to echo louder than the mall's chatter outside. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their sterile brightness spilling across the bare walls. The small windowless room smelled faintly of coffee, sweat, and the stale tang of disinfectant. The air was thick, claustrophobic, pressing against her chest with every breath. Zora sat in the hard metal chair, her wrists bound in cuffs that dug deeper with each tiny movement. The steel bit her skin, sharp and unrelenting. Blood was already pooling along the edges, the faint sting reminding her that she was not free, that her body had been reduced to property under someone else's authority. She lowered her eyes to the floor, not in defeat but to steady herself. "Stay calm," she told herself. "Dignity is your armor." The security guards who had dragged her in leaned against the walls, their casual stance like vultures waiting to see if their prey would squirm. One picked at his nails. The other adjusted his radio as if she were already nothing more than another name in a logbook. Their silence was worse than shouting. It was indifference, the kind that stripped away humanity. She glanced at the table in front of her. Her backpack sat there, untouched for the moment. Inside were the pieces of her Saturday, the solar panel, the wiring, her notebooks full of neat handwriting and equations. They were her proof of purpose, her evidence of belonging. Yet in this room, none of it seemed to matter. Her voice alone would not carry weight here. She knew it the moment those cuffs closed around her. The door opened again, and a new presence filled the room. Officer James Reeves. His badge glinted under the lights as he stepped in, his stride deliberate, his face carved into a smirk that carried more than authority. It carried enjoyment. He looked at Zora not like a child, not like a student, but like a suspect he was eager to prove guilty. His hand rested on the butt of his holstered weapon as if to remind everyone who held power in this small room. "So," Reeves drawled, not addressing Zora but looking at the store manager who had followed him in, "what do we have here?" Garrett Wilson puffed up beside him, eager to hand over his version of the truth. "Caught this one stealing a customer's phone. High-end model, $2,000. We've got an eyewitness." Reeves nodded as though the words were gospel. He turned his gaze on Zora with a kind of casual contempt that cut sharper than open hostility. "Another thief," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've seen the type 100 times." Zora lifted her chin slightly, refusing to shrink under his stare. She took in the sterile room again, the cuffs, the smirks, and the silence. Every piece of it was designed to box her in, to trap her until she broke. But inside her chest, her grandmother's words pulsed louder than her fear. "Dignity is your armor, do not let them take it." Reeves finally approached the table, his boots heavy against the tile floor. Without asking permission, he yanked Zora's backpack from the chair and dumped it upside down. Everything spilled out in a messy scatter. Notebooks slid open, revealing her careful notes on energy conversion. Pens clattered across the floor. Her wallet landed with a soft slap, the flap opening to reveal her student ID and the small, perfect attendance certificate she carried everywhere because her grandmother insisted it was proof of character. Reeves ignored it all. He pawed through her things with rough hands, treating each item as if it confirmed his suspicion. He pushed aside the wires, the solar panels, the folded shopping list. "Where'd you hide it?" he demanded, his tone sharp, impatient. Zora swallowed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I didn't take anything. My bag has nothing but school supplies and the components for my project. If you review the store's security footage, it will prove that." Reeves snorted. "Footage, please. I've heard that one before." He grabbed her notebook, flipped through a few pages, then tossed it back onto the pile. "All this science fair stuff doesn't impress me. Where's the phone?" She shook her head again. "I don't have it. You can search me as much as you want. There is no phone because I didn't take one." Her calmness seemed to aggravate him. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "You know what your kind always does? You think if you talk politely enough, you can fool us. I've been on this job 20 years. I know when I see a liar." The words landed heavy, weighted with more than accusation. They dripped with the kind of prejudice that made Zora's chest tighten. She drew a slow breath, trying to steady her pulse. "Sir, I am telling you the truth. I'm an AP student. My teacher can confirm everything. Please just call him." Reeves laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "AP student? Top of the class? Sure you are. And what's next? Your dad's a senator? Maybe your mom works at the Pentagon?" His smirk widened as he gestured to the guards, drawing them into his performance. "Yeah, I've heard it all before." The room erupted in small chuckles. Even Karen Thompson, the accuser who still sat primly in the corner, joined in with a derisive smile. The sound filled the sterile room with poison, a chorus of disbelief designed to break her. Zora's hands ached under the cuffs. The steel had already cut deep grooves into her skin. She winced as she shifted slightly, the movement forcing more blood to seep against the metal, but she refused to lower her eyes. She met Reeves's gaze directly, her dignity holding her upright even as the pain worsened. "My mother is Colonel Vanessa Jackson," she said clearly, each word sharp as glass. "United States Army, Delta Force." For a brief second, silence fell. Then came the laughter. Cruel, loud, echoing off the walls. Reeves threw back his head as if she had told the funniest lie he had ever heard. Karen shook her head. The guards smirked. In their eyes, her truth had become the punchline to a joke. Reeves stepped closer, his smirk now darker. "Nice try, sweetheart," he said. "Delta Force, huh? That's creative. And what do you think is going to happen? She's going to burst through that door and save you? You're in my world now." He tugged on the chain between her cuffs, pulling her forward with deliberate cruelty. The steel cut deeper, the sharp pain sending a jolt up her arms. Zora hissed quietly, her body stiffening as blood trickled in small streaks across her wrists. She wanted to cry out, wanted to demand mercy, but the echo of her grandmother's voice steadied her again. "Dignity is your armor, hold it." The younger of the two guards shifted uneasily. His eyes flicked to the blood dripping from her skin, but he said nothing. Reeves' presence filled the room too heavily for him to challenge. Reeves enjoyed the power too much, the sight of a young girl shrinking under pain. He pressed harder, watching her flinch, feeding on it. Zora closed her eyes for a moment. In the silence of her mind, she pictured her mother's face, the calm determination she had seen every time Vanessa had guided her through life's hardest lessons. Her mother had prepared her for moments like this, though no preparation could soften the sting of humiliation. She whispered to herself, low enough that only she could hear, "Hold on, Mom. Just hold on." Reeves smirked again, convinced her silence was surrender. "That's what I thought," he muttered. He dropped the chain, letting the cuffs dig into her skin on their own, then he leaned back, crossing his arms. "We'll keep you here until we figure out where you stashed that phone, and maybe when your little story about Mommy the soldier falls apart, you'll realize lying makes everything worse." Karen Thompson's voice chimed in smoothly, dripping with false concern. "Officer, are you sure we should waste more time? Girls like her usually have friends waiting. Someone probably already slipped the phone out while we were distracted." Reeves nodded thoughtfully, playing into the prejudice. "Good point. Always working in groups, never alone." He glanced back at Zora with mock sympathy. "See? It all adds up." The room was no longer just a place of detention. It had become a stage where her truth was ridiculed, her voice drowned, her dignity tested with every second. Yet deep inside, Zora's resolve only hardened. The cuffs bled her wrists raw, each bead of blood another reminder that she had no power here. But she knew something they did not. Her mother would come, and when she did, the smirks, the laughter, the contempt, all of it would be silenced. For now, all Zora could do was endure. She steadied her breathing, lifted her head, and locked her eyes on the door. The decision was made. She would call her mother, and once that call connected, the trap they had built around her would begin to collapse. The Pentagon's war room was a place of constant motion, even when silence ruled the air. Large screens glowed with shifting maps of Europe and the Middle East, dotted with clusters of satellite images and lines of coded data. Military leaders spoke in clipped sentences, each word a calculation in the delicate balance of national security. At the long polished table sat Colonel Vanessa Jackson, her uniform crisp, her posture unshaken by the weight of responsibility. 20 years of service had sculpted her into the kind of leader others instinctively followed. Her chest bore medals earned in battle, though few knew the stories behind them. Those stories lived in the silence of classified files, the kind of silence that came with sacrifice. She sat straight-backed, focused on the presentation unfolding across the screen. A briefing officer pointed to clusters of enemy movement near a border. Generals leaned forward, offering strategies and contingencies. Vanessa took notes with her usual precision, calm under the pressure, her mind analyzing patterns faster than most computers. And then it came. The soft vibration in her pocket. At first she ignored it. Phones were not meant to interrupt sessions like this. But something in the rhythm of the vibration made her chest tighten. Motherhood was a sixth sense that no uniform could erase. She reached for the phone, sliding it quietly from her pocket. The name on the screen froze her. Zora. Her daughter never called during school hours unless something was wrong. A flicker of fear passed across Vanessa's face, quickly hidden beneath the steel of command. She excused herself with a controlled voice that betrayed nothing. "Family emergency. Continue without me." As she stepped out into the quiet hallway, she pressed accept. "Zora, what's wrong?" The voice on the other end was steady, but Vanessa heard the tremor only a mother could recognize. "Mom? I'm in cuffs at Westfield Mall. They say I stole a phone. I didn't. I asked them to check the footage, but they laughed. They're hurting my wrists." Vanessa stopped in the hallway, the sterile Pentagon walls spinning into the background. Her mind began to map the situation like a battlefield. Evidence ignored, mockery of her daughter's truth, excessive force, racial prejudice dressed as procedure. She could hear Zora trying to control her breathing, the same way Vanessa had taught her during difficult talks. "Are you bleeding?" Vanessa asked sharply. "Yes. The cuffs are too tight. Everyone here is watching and assuming I'm guilty." The pain in Vanessa's chest was heavier than anything she had carried in combat, but her voice, when it came, was even, commanding, the tone of a soldier who had faced fire and refused to flinch. "Stay calm, give them nothing more. I will be there, 30 minutes. Do not let them break you." She ended the call and stood in silence for a moment, her fists clenched at her sides. She had faced enemies overseas, but nothing prepared her for hearing her daughter humiliated at home. Vanessa strode back into the briefing room long enough to make her intentions clear. Her commanding officer, General Marcus Hayes, looked up from the maps as she approached. Their eyes met, and he read everything in her expression before she spoke. "Sir, my daughter is being illegally detained at Westfield Mall. Racial profiling, excessive force. I need emergency leave now." General Hayes did not hesitate. He had served beside her in combat, seen her courage when others faltered. "Go," he said firmly. "Take whatever resources you need. Keep me updated." The weight of his support steadied her. Vanessa left the war room with her stride unbroken, pulling out her phone as she moved. Her first call was to Major Terrence Williams, an old friend and a JAG attorney. "Terrence, Zora's being held at Westfield Mall. False accusation, racial profiling. Meet me there with every legal document you can bring." His response was immediate. "I'll be there in 20. They won't touch her again once I arrive." Her next call was to Captain Elena Rodriguez, military police. Elena, I need you at Westfield Mall security office. Bring a medical kit. My daughter's wrists are bleeding from tight cuffs." Rodriguez's voice was steady, filled with the kind of loyalty that came from years of trust. "Understood. I'll mobilize a small team. We'll treat her injuries and document everything." Each call was a tactical order, delivered with precision. Vanessa was not gathering friends. She was assembling a unit, a strike team for justice, not for a battlefield abroad, but for the one her daughter had been forced into at home. Her final call before leaving the building was back to General Hayes. "I have Williams and Rodriguez converging on the site. I'll update you once I have Zora." "Keep it contained, Vanessa," Hayes replied, but she could hear the steel in his tone. "And bring her home safe." Within minutes she had left the Pentagon, her uniform jacket folded neatly in the back seat of her car. She had changed into dark jeans, a burgundy blouse, and a black blazer. Civilian clothes, deliberate, chosen to test how they would treat her as just another black mother before revealing who she really was. As she pulled into the midday traffic, her jaw tightened. The steering wheel trembled under her grip, not from fear but from fury. She had taught Zora since childhood how to survive moments like this. Keep your hands visible, speak respectfully, do not argue, know your rights. Lessons no child should have to learn, but essential for survival. Now those lessons were being tested in real time, and the thought made her throat ache. The highway stretched before Vanessa, a blur of asphalt under the August sun. She drove fast but controlled, every move precise. Her mind, sharpened by years of combat missions, broke the situation down into routes and contingencies. If traffic stalled, she had alternates. If police interfered, she had allies on standby. But even as her soldier's mind mapped the mission, her mother's heart replayed the sound of her daughter's voice, the restraint, the effort to stay calm while bleeding in handcuffs. Vanessa gripped the wheel harder, forcing back the surge of anger. She could not afford to arrive consumed by rage. She needed to be focused, composed, ready to dismantle them with authority. The memories came unbidden, flickering like old film reels across her vision. Zora, at 7 years old, standing in their living room as Vanessa explained how to respond if stopped by police. "Keep your hands where they can see them, baby. Speak clearly. Do not reach for anything unless they tell you." Zora's small eyes had widened, full of confusion. But why would they stop me if I didn't do anything wrong? Vanessa had swallowed the truth that day, not wanting to break her daughter's spirit. Because sometimes, she had explained softly, people will see what they want to see. Your job is to stay safe until the truth can be proved. Another flash. Zora at 12, coming home in tears because a store security guard had followed her through an upscale department store, shadowing every aisle. Vanessa had held her close, whispering that her worth was not defined by their suspicion. And now the lessons of those painful conversations were no longer hypothetical. Zora was living them, bleeding under the weight of prejudice. Vanessa's phone buzzed again. It was Major Williams. "I'm en route, 20 minutes out. I'll contact the police chief directly before I arrive. They won't get away with this." Another buzz. "Captain Rodriguez, we're in position. I'll meet you at the entrance. Medical team ready." Vanessa exhaled slowly, her fury pressed into something sharper. This was no longer just about her daughter. This was about a system that had cornered too many children before, but today they had picked the wrong one. As the mall came into view, the glass facade gleaming in the sun, Vanessa's heart steadied. She adjusted her blazer in the mirror, checked the pocket where her military ID rested, and whispered to herself, "Hold on, Zora, I'm coming." She parked with precision, her car angled for a quick exit. Her phone buzzed one last time, confirming her team's arrival from different directions. Colonel Vanessa Jackson had led soldiers into war zones, but nothing compared to the fury of a mother whose child had been humiliated. She opened the car door, stepped out into the sweltering air, and walked toward the entrance with the stride of a storm contained in human form. This was not just a rescue. It was a reckoning. The glass doors of Westfield Mall slid open with a soft hiss, letting in the August air behind Vanessa Jackson. Her stride was measured, her shoulders square, her chin raised just slightly higher than the ordinary passerby. Though dressed in civilian clothes, there was no mistaking the weight she carried. People moved instinctively out of her way, as if the air shifted around her presence. Mothers tugged their children a step closer, not out of fear, but in recognition of something undeniable. Authority radiated from her every step, invisible yet palpable. The polished floor reflected her silhouette as she moved down the wide concourse. Storefronts lined the path, some with mannequins frozen mid-pose, others with rows of shoes or electronics. Yet the details blurred, background noise against the sharp focus of her mission. She passed a group of teenagers who fell silent mid-laugh, sensing the tension in her stride. Two mall security guards posted near an escalator straightened unconsciously, as though her gaze had weighed on them. Neither spoke as she passed. Every breath Vanessa took was measured, controlled. Inside, her chest burned with fury at the thought of Zora bleeding, mocked, humiliated. But her training had taught her that power was never in volume. Power was in restraint, in the quiet command that made others lower their voices without being asked. She carried that lesson like a weapon now. The further she walked, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift. Shoppers began to glance over shoulders, whispering without knowing why. A woman in a sundress stepped aside, murmuring an apology, though Vanessa had not brushed her. Even the air seemed heavier in her wake. The line of fluorescent lights above cast her in a corridor of illumination, each step deliberate, inevitable. When she turned a corner, the frosted glass door of the security office came into view. Two guards stood outside, chatting casually, one sipping from a paper cup of coffee. Their conversation faltered the moment they saw her. Vanessa did not speak, but her eyes locked on them, unblinking, and the chatter died in their throats. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area," one started, his tone meant to assert control. Vanessa's gaze did not waver. "Move." There was no anger in her voice, only command. It was not a request. Something in her tone triggered instinct deeper than policy. Both guards shifted, their postures stiff, their words swallowed. One stepped back against the wall, the other moved aside without a sound. Vanessa brushed past them, her hand steady as she reached for the door handle. Behind her, the murmurs of onlookers rippled like waves against stone. She ignored them all. Her daughter was inside, and nothing, no wall, no badge, no false authority, would hold her back now. The door opened into the security office with a muted creak, the sterile fluorescent lights spilling onto her face. Vanessa's eyes adjusted quickly, sweeping the room with the sharpness of a soldier trained to assess danger in seconds. The office smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, the kind of artificial cleanliness meant to hide the rot underneath. At the center of the room sat Zora. Her wrists were cuffed behind her back, the skin raw, angry red, streaked with blood that had dried in thin rivulets. The sight pierced Vanessa's heart like a blade, but she forced the emotion down into the steel chamber of her discipline. Her expression did not shift, her stride unbroken. She crossed the room silently, her heels clicking against the tile like the steady rhythm of a clock counting down. Zora lifted her head. Her eyes widened when she saw her mother. For a moment, her composure cracked, the teenager inside her breaking through the armor she had built in those humiliating minutes. Relief, fear, and love collided in her gaze. She whispered, barely audible, "Mom." Vanessa gave the faintest nod, a mother's reassurance wrapped in the precision of a commander. She wanted to run forward, to pull Zora into her arms, but the soldier in her knew timing was everything. First, dismantle the threat, then embrace the wounded. Behind a desk cluttered with papers and confiscated items stood Officer Reeves. He leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed, smirk fixed on his lips like a mask. In front of him lay Zora's belongings, her school notebooks, a pencil case, a science project folder, as if these were evidence of a crime. Reeves did not stand when Vanessa entered. Instead, his eyes narrowed, sizing her up with the careless arrogance of a man who believed the room belonged to him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone laced with mockery. Vanessa's voice was even, deliberate. "Remove those cuffs." Reeves tilted his head, pretending to consider the request. "Afraid that's against procedure, ma'am. She's a suspect in an ongoing theft investigation. Can't have her walking free, now can we?" His words were lazy, but the sneer behind them was sharp. Vanessa's eyes flicked once more to Zora's wrists, the blood stark against her daughter's skin. Her jaw tightened, but her tone did not rise. "I said, remove them." Reeves laughed, the sound short and sharp. "And who exactly are you to be giving me orders? Last I checked, this isn't your house, and she isn't special. Shoplifters don't get parental privileges." The silence that followed was heavy. Zora watched, her breath caught in her chest, sensing something shifting in the air. Vanessa reached into her blazer pocket, her hand steady. She drew out her identification card, polished edges glinting under the fluorescent light. She placed it on the desk between them with the precision of a soldier placing evidence on the table. The card bore her name, her photograph, her title: Colonel Vanessa Jackson, United States Army, Delta Force. The room froze. Reeves's smirk faltered for the briefest of moments, the mask cracking before he forced it back into place. His eyes darted to the ID, scanning the words, the seal, the authority embedded in every letter. A flicker of unease crossed his features, quickly hidden beneath bravado. He straightened, arms still crossed, though his posture no longer carried the same weight. "That supposed to impress me?" he asked, his voice a notch quieter than before. "This is a mall, not a battlefield. Your rank doesn't mean much here." Vanessa did not blink. "It means everything here. It means I understand the limits of your authority, the violations you've already committed, and the consequences that will follow if you don't remove those cuffs immediately." Her tone was ice, each word dropped like a gavel striking wood. Reeves shifted, leaning back against the desk, forcing out a laugh that sounded hollow now. "You think flashing some badge changes the fact your kid tried to steal a phone?" Vanessa's gaze sharpened. "Produce evidence. Show me footage, provide a witness. Otherwise, what you have is a bleeding child, restrained beyond protocol, her belongings treated as contraband, her rights mocked in public view. That isn't procedure. That's abuse under color of authority." The air thickened. Even the other guards in the room glanced uneasily at each other, suddenly unsure whether Reeves's confidence held weight against the woman standing before them. Vanessa took one deliberate step closer, her presence filling the space like a storm cloud ready to break. "You tightened those cuffs until her skin broke. You laughed at her identity. You humiliated a minor without cause. Every policy you claim to hide behind, you have already shredded." A court opened 3 weeks ago. Zora sat motionless, watching her mother transform the room. Each word was a shield, each phrase a weapon. Reeves's mouth opened, but no words came. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights above. His arrogance faltered again, and in that flicker, everyone could see it. The power had shifted. Vanessa did not relent. Her voice cut through the silence like steel through cloth. "This stops now. Remove the cuffs, or I will file charges of unlawful detention, child endangerment, and civil rights violations before this day ends. And I will not be filing them alone. Do you understand me?" The room was no longer his. The storm had arrived, and its eye stood inches away, unwavering. The air inside the cramped security office grew thick, every eye darting between Vanessa and Reeves. The tension was broken by the sharp click of the door opening again. Major Williams stepped inside, his posture carrying the weight of the Judge Advocate General's office. His uniform was crisp, his expression carved in granite. Behind him, Captain Rodriguez entered, his medical bag slung across one shoulder, his eyes immediately moving to Zora's wrists with clinical focus. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. Where moments ago Reeves had leaned on arrogance, now he found himself standing against the full weight of military authority and accountability. Vanessa had not come alone. Reinforcements had arrived, and they carried the credibility of law and the urgency of care. Williams walked directly to the desk, placing a stack of documents neatly in front of Reeves. These are authorizations for immediate review of detention practices, signed and sealed. You will comply. His tone was calm, deliberate, but the authority behind it was undeniable. Reeves blinked, his jaw tightening. This is private property. You are detaining a minor under suspicion of theft without evidence. Williams cut in, his voice razor sharp. And you are doing so in violation of civil and constitutional protections. That puts this incident under my jurisdiction now. Captain Rodriguez crouched beside Zora, his gloved hands gentle as he inspected her wrists. She needs these cleaned and dressed immediately, he said, his voice low but filled with urgency. Leaving her like this could risk infection. Whoever tightened these cuffs beyond regulation is directly responsible for the damage. Zora winced as the antiseptic touched her skin, but her eyes never left her mother. She drew strength from the silent command Vanessa radiated, even as the room swirled with legal and medical assessments. The other guards, once comfortably aligned with Reeves, now shifted uneasily. They glanced toward one another, silently questioning whether the man they followed had just led them into a battlefield they could not win. The authority in the room no longer belonged to him. Reeves tried to steady his voice. You think bringing in your friends changes anything? She was caught red-handed. We had probable cause. Before Vanessa could answer, a sound cut through the room. Sharp, sudden, undeniable. A phone rang. Not Zora's, not Vanessa's. The sound came from across the room, muffled slightly by fabric. Every head turned. The ringing was coming from Karen's purse. For a moment, silence held. The phone kept ringing, each vibration like a hammer striking Reeves's credibility. Karen, the mall shopper who had pointed at Zora with trembling indignation hours earlier, froze. Her face flushed, her hand clutching her bag as though she could will the sound away. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, the precision of a sniper locking on a target. She tilted her head ever so slightly. Would you like to explain why the stolen phone is ringing in your purse? Karen stammered, her lips parting without sound. Her eyes darted to Reeves, searching for rescue, for some excuse to cling to. But Reeves's face had paled, his smirk gone, his bravado slipping like sand through fingers. Major Williams stepped forward, his phone already recording. Go ahead, let it ring. The ringing continued, echoing in the sterile room, undeniable proof that the accusation had been built on a lie. Finally, Karen fumbled with the zipper, pulling the phone out. The screen lit up, her husband's name flashing in bright letters, the same phone she had sworn Zora had stolen. The evidence was damning in its simplicity. Vanessa's voice cut through the heavy silence. You planted it. You pointed at my daughter, confident no one would question you. You let her be cuffed, mocked, and injured, all while holding the truth in your own hands. Karen's eyes watered, her breath shallow. It must have been a mistake. Williams's voice snapped like a whip. Save it. This isn't a mistake. This is fabrication. And it won't vanish under your excuses. He turned the camera toward Reeves. And you backed her without verification. You detained a child without evidence. That is malice, not error. Rodriguez stood, his gloves now streaked faintly with Zora's blood. His voice was calm but cutting. I've seen this too many times. Minorities targeted, medical neglect ignored, injuries brushed off. But this time, we're not brushing anything off. Reeves swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing as sweat began to prick his forehead. His eyes flicked toward the security cameras mounted in the corner of the room, then back to the officers surrounding him. The mask was slipping, piece by piece. Williams followed his gaze. Good idea. Let's check the footage. He gestured toward the console in the corner. I want every second of today pulled up. If she planted that phone, it will show. The guards hesitated, then one reached for the console controls. The truth was about to unfold on screen, frame by frame. The footage loaded with a flicker of static, then settled into a clear image of the mall concourse. Williams ordered the timestamp adjusted. The minutes rolled back to when Zora had been browsing the electronics display. The room leaned forward, eyes fixed on the monitor. There it was. Zora stood, her backpack slung casually, flipping through her notebook as she compared phone models. Across the aisle, Karen lingered, her eyes darting nervously. In one smooth motion, Karen slipped her phone into her purse, then casually brushed against Zora's bag, sliding something small inside. The freeze frame was undeniable. Williams paused the footage, zoomed in. The phone, caught mid-drop, slipping from Karen's hand into Zora's belongings. The silence in the room was suffocating. Then Williams spoke, his voice low but resonant. "This is premeditated. She's done this before." He turned toward Vanessa, recording still in hand. "We'll cross-section this against mall complaints. I guarantee this isn't her first false accusation." Rodriguez pulled his tablet from his kit, fingers flying across the screen. Within minutes, he exhaled sharply. "Here," Reeves' record. "Multiple complaints of excessive force, nearly every one involving minorities. Most dismissed internally, but the pattern is here. Assaults, detentions, injuries, all swept under the rug." He read aloud one line after another, each entry landing like a hammer blow. A teenage boy with a broken arm, a woman shoved against a wall, a child locked in a room for hours, each incident buried beneath bureaucracy. Reeves' skin drained of color. His lips parted, but the words faltered, collapsing before they could escape. The room no longer saw a confident officer. They saw the unraveling of a man exposed, his legacy of cruelty laid bare in ink and pixels. Vanessa stepped closer, her shadow falling across him. Her voice carried the weight of both mother and commander. "Every complaint you thought forgotten will be unearthed. Every victim silenced will have a voice. And every scar you left will speak louder than your excuses." Reeves stared at her, trembling now, his arrogance dissolving under the avalanche of truth. The walls of the office seemed to close in, the monitors replaying his complicity, the documents highlighting his brutality. He had mocked a child, dismissed a mother, laughed in the face of law, and now the reckoning had come. Williams closed his folder, his voice final. "This is over. You're finished." Reeves could only stand there, pale and broken, as the storm of justice he had mocked finally swallowed him whole. Outside the security office, the air was no longer calm. Shoppers who had witnessed the commotion earlier lingered, their curiosity blending with outrage as word spread. Phones lifted high above heads, recording every angle of the tense standoff. On social media, the story had already taken flight. Clips uploaded by witnesses showed Zora in cuffs, her mother entering the mall like a force of nature, and Reeves's dismissive sneer. Within minutes, hashtags flooded timelines. "Justice for Zora," "Protect Black Girls," "Accountability Now." What began as whispers had grown into a digital storm. Notifications lit up across the nation, strangers weighing in on what was unfolding in real time. Students, activists, and journalists shared the images, demanding explanations. By the time the first news van screeched to a halt outside Westfield Mall, the parking lot was already filling with people, drawn by anger and solidarity. Inside, the guards shifted uneasily as the muffled roar of the crowd seeped through the walls. Vanessa remained composed, but even she felt the shift. What was once contained in a small room had grown into a public reckoning. Every second they stood there, the eyes of the world grew sharper. A second van arrived, then another. Reporters adjusted microphones. Camera operators set up tripods. Some shoppers who had witnessed Zora's humiliation earlier now recounted the events to journalists, their voices rising with conviction. A teenage boy replayed his footage for a local news crew, showing the exact moment Karen accused Zora. A mother pointed to her own children, saying she feared the same thing could happen to them. Inside, Major Williams checked his phone and nodded grimly. It's trending nationwide. The pressure just went through the roof. Reeves clenched his fists, sweat dripping down his temple. He glanced at the door as though escape might still be possible, but the noise outside told him otherwise. There would be no easy exit. Zora, still seated but freer now, whispered to her mother, "They're out there, aren't they?" Vanessa touched her shoulder gently. "Yes, and they're watching. That means the truth will hold." The office door suddenly opened again, this time with authority not from the military, but from the city. Police Chief Garcia stepped in, his presence carrying the weight of civic command. His eyes swept the room once, landing on Zora's wrists, then on Reeves. The silence deepened. The chief had arrived, and with him the next level of accountability. Chief Garcia's steps were deliberate as he crossed the room. He ignored the murmurs, his gaze fixed on Reeves, who stiffened under the scrutiny. The chief's eyes carried both disappointment and suspicion, like a man already tired of excuses he had yet to hear. "What happened here?" Garcia's voice was even, but beneath it lay steel. Reeves cleared his throat, straightening his shoulders. "Shoplifting suspect, standard procedure. Resistance led to necessary restraint." The chief tilted his head slightly, unimpressed. "Where is your body cam footage?" Reeves froze. The question hung heavy, simple yet devastating. For weeks, the department had stressed the importance of cameras. Every incident recorded, every interaction documented. There was no hiding behind paperwork anymore. "It malfunctioned," Reeves said quickly. His words tumbled out too fast, the kind of lie built in desperation. Garcia's eyebrow lifted. "Interesting, because the logs show it was fully functional this morning. You checked it out yourself. Care to explain why it suddenly stopped working in the middle of detaining a child?" The room stilled. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Williams folded his arms, his phone camera capturing every second. Reeves swallowed hard. Maybe the system glitched. These things happen." "No," Garcia said firmly. "These things don't just happen. Not when there's a clear pattern. You've had more complaints in the last year than half this department combined. You can't hide behind a glitch this time." Karen, pale and silent, tried to shrink into the corner, but the chief's eyes swept over her too. "And you," he said sharply. "You pointed the finger. That phone was ringing in your own purse. Do you understand the chaos you've caused?" Karen's voice trembled. I thought I lost it. I panicked." "Enough," Garcia snapped. His tone left no room for excuses. Before the silence could settle again, a hesitant voice rose from the back. It was Brad Reynolds, the youngest of the guards, barely out of academy training. His face was pale, his hands shaky, but his eyes carried something new. Resolve. "Chief," Brad said quietly, "there's something you need to hear." All eyes turned toward him. Vanessa watched carefully, recognizing the courage it took for a subordinate to break ranks. Brad took a deep breath, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen. A recording began to play. The voice on the recording was unmistakable. Small management, stern and direct. "We've had complaints about loitering. You know the drill. Keep a closer eye on black teenagers. They're the usual suspects. Don't let anyone pressure you otherwise." The words dripped like acid into the room. The implication was clear. This was no accident, it was policy. The recording played again, and again, its venom undeniable. The guards shifted uncomfortably, some looking down at their shoes, others clenching their jaws. Reeves's face flushed red, but not with shame, with the realization that his shield of authority had been shattered from within. Chief Garcia's voice was low, almost a growl. "You mean to tell me this was sanctioned? That racial profiling was official policy here?" Brad nodded, his eyes darting nervously toward his colleagues. "Yes, sir, we were told in a staff meeting last week. I recorded it because it didn't sit right with me. I thought maybe someone would need proof one day." Williams stepped forward, placing a firm hand on the young guard's shoulder. "You did the right thing, son. This is evidence. Solid, indisputable." Vanessa's eyes softened as she regarded Brad. Courage doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes it looks like telling the truth, when everyone else stays silent. The crowd outside had swelled by now, their chants faint but steady through the walls. Phones streamed live, broadcasting the gathering to thousands, then millions. Justice for Zora was no longer just a hashtag. It was a movement building in real time. Garcia exhaled slowly, then turned toward Vanessa. His tone was measured, almost deferential. "Colonel, you've seen more of this than most. What do you think?" Vanessa's gaze swept the room, lingering on her daughter, then on the blood-stained gloves in Rodriguez's hands, then on Reeves, shrinking under the weight of exposure. She straightened her back, her voice carrying the force of command honed over decades. "This doesn't end here," she said firmly. "What happened to my daughter is not just about one guard, one accuser, one moment. It is systemic, a culture that enables lies, excuses violence, and targets children for the color of their skin. You don't fix that with one suspension or one apology. You fix it by tearing the rot out at its roots." Her words rang like a declaration, not just to the people in the room but to the crowd outside, and the millions watching online. The security office felt less like a private space now and more like a stage, the world leaning in to hear what would come next. Zora looked at her mother, eyes wide with both fear and pride. She understood that her pain had become more than her own. It had become part of a larger battle. Chief Garcia nodded slowly, the weight of her words pressing into his conscience. "Then we'll treat it as such. This won't be buried, not anymore." For the first time since the ordeal began, Reeves lowered his head, no longer defiant, no longer smug. The crowd outside roared louder, sensing a shift, sensing that history was unfolding behind the closed doors of the mall's security office. The door to the security office swung open again, this time with a force that rattled the glass panel. A tall man in an expensive tailored suit stormed in, his face flushed with anger, his briefcase still swinging from his hand. Karen immediately straightened in her chair, her eyes widening with relief. "Honey, thank God you're here," she cried, her voice shrill with desperation. The man didn't even glance at her at first. His eyes locked on Chief Garcia, then flicked to Vanessa, then to Zora. "I am Richard Calloway," he announced with a booming voice, "senior partner at Calloway and Brandt. This is unlawful detention. My wife is being held without cause, and I will bury this department, this mall, and anyone else who thinks they can lay a finger on her." The room thickened with tension. Some of the younger guards shifted nervously, intimidated by the weight his words carried. Even Reeves seemed to perk up, as though reinforcements had arrived on his side. Garcia remained steady, his tone calm but cutting. "Mr. Calloway, your wife is not being unlawfully detained. She is under investigation for filing a false report, planting evidence, and triggering a violent incident. That falls under the category of hate crimes." The words hit like a thunderclap. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. Richard's confidence faltered for the first time, though he tried to mask it with bluster. "That is absurd. You have no proof." Williams raised his phone. "We have footage. We have the phone ringing in her own purse. And now, thanks to your own security team, we have recordings of racially targeted directives. The evidence is overwhelming." Richard's bravado flickered, but he pushed forward, his voice straining. "Do you realize who I am? Do you realize the power I hold in this city?" Vanessa stepped forward, her voice sharp but controlled. "And do you realize who I am? I am Colonel Vanessa Jackson, United States Army Delta Force, retired. And that young woman you allowed your wife to humiliate and this officer to assault is my daughter. You can wave your titles all you want, but you will not silence this." For the first time, Richard faltered visibly. His eyes darted toward Karen, who shrank under his gaze. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the muffled roar of the crowd outside, growing louder by the minute. The silence didn't last long. A shorter, nervous man in a navy suit appeared at the doorway, clutching a leather folder to his chest. His tie was loose, his forehead damp with sweat. He cleared his throat before speaking, his voice wavering. "I'm Henry Dalton, corporate counsel for Westfield Mall," he announced, forcing a strained smile. "Let's all take a breath here. Surely we can come to a mutually beneficial resolution?" Garcia narrowed his eyes. "Resolution?" Dalton's smile wavered further. He opened his folder and slid out a document. "A non-disclosure agreement. Substantial compensation will be provided, of course, in exchange for discretion. No lawsuits, no press conferences, no reputational damage. Everyone walks away satisfied." Vanessa's eyes hardened. She didn't even look at the paper. "You think this is about money?" Dalton licked his lips nervously. "With all due respect, Colonel, everything is about money. I assure you, the offer is generous." Vanessa stepped closer, her presence towering even without raising her voice. "My daughter was humiliated, handcuffed, and mocked. She bled because of your guard's abuse, and all of it was fueled by lies and profiling encouraged by your management. This is not for sale. My child's dignity, our community's pain, the systemic rot you represent, none of it can be bought." Dalton's hands trembled slightly as he shoved the papers back into his folder. "If this gets out, the mall could face catastrophic losses. Hundreds of jobs could be affected." Williams interjected, his voice steady but sharp. "Then perhaps you should have thought about that before sanctioning racial targeting and allowing corrupt officers to run unchecked. You do not get to play the victim here." The weight of Vanessa's refusal hung in the air like a banner. Outside, the chants grew louder, clearer. "Justice for Zora! Justice for Zora!" The sound seeped into every corner of the room, rattling Dalton's composure even further. Richard Calloway glared at the lawyer, then at Karen, then back at Garcia. "You're destroying reputations with baseless claims." Garcia shook his head firmly. "No, we're exposing truth. And the more you try to bury it, the deeper the hole you dig for yourselves." The room bristled with tension, and then, suddenly, alarms began to beep faintly from the monitors on the wall. A mall technician, pale-faced, stumbled into the office. "Chief, we've got a problem. Someone's trying to delete the footage from the security servers." The room erupted into chaos as the technician scrambled toward the console. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up logs. The screen flashed red. "Delete command initiated. Attempting override." Garcia stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Who authorized this?" The technician shook his head quickly. "It's the store manager. He's in the server room right now. He's trying to wipe everything." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Of course he is. They're desperate." Before Garcia could respond, the technician pressed a final key. The screen blinked green. Federal override activated, data locked. Everyone froze. Williams leaned over to read the message. "Looks like someone higher up anticipated this. Federal order just froze the files. They can't touch anything now." Dalton paled, his folder clutched tightly to his chest. This is catastrophic." Reeves, who had been silent until now, suddenly snapped, his face twisted with rage, his voice rising into a shout. "This is all lies! You think you can come in here, parade around with your cameras and your uniforms and destroy me? You don't know who you're dealing with!" He lunged forward, pointing directly at Vanessa. "You're under arrest for obstruction. You and your brat." The guards around him stiffened, unsure whether to move. Zora gasped, clutching her mother's arm. Garcia stepped between them instantly, his voice booming. "That's enough, Reeves. You're done." Reeves's face contorted, his rage spilling over. "You can't suspend me. I've served this department longer than you've been chief. You think you can strip me of my authority?" Garcia didn't flinch. "I don't think. I know." With deliberate precision, he reached forward, unclipped Reeves' badge, and held out his hand. "Your gun. Now." For a long moment Reeves stood frozen, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. Then slowly, with trembling fingers, he pulled his sidearm from its holster and slammed it into Garcia's palm. His badge followed, clattering onto the desk like a gavel sealing a verdict. The room was silent except for the chants outside, growing louder, fiercer. Reeves's shoulders slumped, his face pale now, stripped of its arrogant mask. For the first time, he looked small. Vanessa's voice broke the silence, calm but resolute. You tried to humiliate my daughter. Instead, you've unmasked yourself before the world. Garcia turned to the remaining guards. Escort him out. He is suspended effective immediately. Two guards stepped forward, gripping Reeves by the arms. He resisted weakly, but the fight had drained from him. As they led him out, the crowd outside roared, sensing the fall of a man who had once hidden behind power. The antiseptic scent of the emergency room stung Vanessa's nose as she pushed open the swinging doors. Zora lay on a hospital bed, her wrists raw and red where the cuffs had dug into her skin. A nurse gently cleaned the wounds, her gloved hands moving with care. A doctor stood nearby, dictating notes into a recorder. Lacerations consistent with tight restraints, potential long-term scarring, photographs recommended for evidentiary purposes. Vanessa stood still, her hands clenched at her sides. For hours she had held herself like stone, unbreakable in the face of arrogance and threats. But now, looking at her daughter, lying pale beneath fluorescent lights, the mask cracked. She stepped closer, her voice low but trembling. "Baby, I'm here. You're safe now." Zora looked up, her eyes watery but steady. "I know, Mom. I knew you'd come." The words pierced through Vanessa's armor. She reached for her daughter's hand, careful to avoid the gauze the nurse was wrapping. "I should have been there sooner." Zora shook her head weakly. "You were there when it mattered." The doctor glanced at Vanessa with a quiet nod. "We'll document everything. This isn't just treatment, it's evidence. The injuries speak louder than any excuse they try to make." He turned to a staff photographer who had entered the room with a camera, snapping precise, clinical images of every wound. Vanessa swallowed hard, her jaw tightening. Evidence. Proof. She had spent her life chasing evidence in battlefields and intelligence briefings, but nothing had prepared her for this. Proof carved into her child's skin. As the nurse finished wrapping the bandages, Vanessa leaned down and brushed Zora's hair gently back from her face. Her voice was softer than anyone in the room had ever heard from the iron-willed colonel. "You're so brave." Zora smiled faintly, though her lips trembled. "I'm just trying to be like you." Vanessa blinked back tears. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to press her forehead lightly against her daughter's. For a moment, they were just mother and child. No titles, no cameras, no crowd outside. Only the fragile bond of love, stronger than cuffs, stronger than shame. The hum of machines, the clicking of the camera, the whisper of nurses, it all faded into the background as Vanessa silently vowed that her daughter's pain would not be in vain. This was more than an incident now. This was a turning point. By late evening, detectives from the city's internal affairs unit arrived at the hospital. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady notebook, pulled a chair up beside Zora's bed. "Ms. Jackson, we need your account. Take your time. Whatever you say will go on record." Zora winced slightly as she shifted, but her voice was steady. "He told me I was lying, that people like me make things up. He called me a fraud. Then he said, 'Girls like you always end up in cuffs anyway.'" The room stilled at her words. The detective's pen scratched quickly, capturing every detail. The nurse, still tidying supplies, paused to glance at Zora, her expression hardening. Even the photographer, packing his equipment, stopped for a moment to meet the young girl's gaze. Zora continued, her tone firm despite the pain. "He laughed when I said my mom was coming. He said no one would believe me, that even if I screamed it wouldn't matter." She drew in a shaky breath, then looked straight at the detective. "But it does matter. You're here. You're listening." The detective nodded. "Yes, it matters. Every word. You've shown incredible strength tonight." Vanessa stood behind her daughter, her hand resting lightly on Zora's shoulder. She had never been prouder, yet never more humbled. Here was her child, her teenage girl, speaking with a dignity that seemed older than her years, carrying herself with a resolve that silenced the room. One of the detectives lowered his notepad. "Ms. Jackson, would you be willing to testify if this moves to trial?" Zora's eyes didn't flinch. "Yes, he wanted to scare me into silence, but I won't stay quiet." The nurse whispered under her breath, just loud enough to be heard, "Braver than half the adults I've treated here." Vanessa's chest swelled with a complicated mix of pride and pain. Her daughter's resilience was astonishing, but it broke her heart that Zora had to summon such strength at all. As the detectives wrapped up their questions, the lead investigator closed his folder. "This isn't just misconduct anymore. This is criminal. Your testimony may change everything." Zora leaned back against the pillow, exhaustion creeping in, but her eyes never wavered. She was tired, bandaged, aching, but she was unshaken. Vanessa caught her gaze, seeing not just her daughter, but a young woman stepping into the fire of truth, and the fire was spreading. By the time night fell, Zora's name had moved far beyond the walls of the hospital. The story of a 16-year-old honor student being handcuffed, accused, and left bleeding in a mall security room had spread like wildfire. On television screens across the country, anchors repeated the same phrase again and again: "Justice for Zora." Every major network carried the images captured by cell phones, her small frame in that NASA shirt, wrists bound, eyes wide with disbelief. Clips replayed endlessly, each time igniting new waves of outrage. Outside the hospital, a crowd had gathered. They carried signs hastily drawn on poster boards, some reading "Dignity is her armor," others with bold black letters spelling out "No more Reeves." Chants rolled up toward the windows, muffled but steady, a heartbeat of collective anger and solidarity. News vans lined the block, their satellite dishes turned toward the sky, feeding every detail to an audience that felt, for the first time in a long while, like the veil had been ripped away. Inside the Pentagon, however, the atmosphere was starkly different. Colonel Vanessa Jackson's name carried weight in those halls, legendary weight. But now it was tangled in controversy. In a closed-door meeting, voices rose around a long oak table. One general leaned forward, jaw clenched, insisting that the situation was spiraling. He argued that Delta Force could not afford the spectacle of one of its commanders in a very public family scandal. Another officer suggested issuing a quiet statement and arranging a settlement, framing the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding blown out of proportion by social media. Their words cut sharp, but Vanessa's reputation had always been for calm in storms. She listened, face unreadable, though her hands pressed firmly together to hide the tremor that wanted to rise. But while the Pentagon strategized, the world outside demanded truth. Editorials filled digital front pages. Civil rights leaders flew into Atlanta overnight, holding press conferences on courthouse steps. Zora's science teacher gave an interview, her voice shaking as she described her student as a gifted young woman who deserved medals, not handcuffs. Even military veterans weighed in, writing open letters that praised Colonel Jackson's service while condemning the very system that had treated her daughter like a criminal. Back in the hospital room, Zora sat upright in her bed, her wrists still bandaged but her voice clear. Detectives had already taken her statement, and she had repeated every detail without faltering. Now she turned to her mother, who sat rigid in the chair beside her. Vanessa's eyes betrayed the weight of years, of battles fought abroad, only to come home and face one she had hoped her daughter would be spared. "They want to settle," Vanessa said quietly, breaking the silence at last. "They'll offer apologies, money, promises. They'll push for it to end here." Her tone was even, but beneath it lived a pain only a mother could know. She had been trained to measure risk, to assess the battlefield, to protect those under her command. But this battlefield was different. The target was her child. Zora listened, her face calm but resolute. The hum of hospital machines filled the pause. She glanced at the television mounted on the wall, where her own face flashed between headlines. Then she looked back to her mother and shook her head slowly. "If we settle," she whispered, Nothing changes. They'll keep doing it. To someone else's daughter. To someone else's mom. The words landed with a weight that made Vanessa's breath catch. She had spent years teaching Zora how to be strong, how to stand tall in a world that too often refused to see her dignity. And now here it was, her daughter, choosing courage over comfort, justice over ease. The general in Vanessa wanted to shield her, the mother in her wanted to cry, but the soldier in her knew Zora was right. Across the city, television crews captured the moment. Protesters lit candles outside the hospital, their glow reflecting against the windows. Inside, the quiet resolve between mother and daughter forged something unshakable. The fight was no longer just personal, it was national, and neither of them would back down. The morning after Zora refused settlement, a quiet but powerful force gathered outside the Jackson home. Veterans from every branch stood shoulder to shoulder, their posture firm, their presence unmistakable. Some wore old uniforms, others simple jackets with unit patches, but all carried the same message. This family was not standing alone. Neighbors watched as the line formed, across the lawn and down the street, a human barrier of discipline and respect. Their formation spoke louder than any press conference. To touch the Jackson family now would mean facing those who had defended the nation with their lives. Local businesses joined in their own way. A coffee shop across from the high school taped handwritten signs in the window that read, "Justice for Zora." A mechanic down the road posted a banner offering free services for military families, inspired by Vanessa's example. Churches rang their bells in unison at noon, each chime echoing solidarity. It was not a loud revolution, but a steady rise of community voices saying enough. At Zora's school, students who once shuffled quietly through hallways now walked with purpose. A coalition formed, led by classmates who had seen too many similar stories. They created an online hub to collect testimonies, photos, and videos of discriminatory incidents. Teachers volunteered to advise, ensuring accuracy and integrity. What began as a defense of one girl was quickly becoming a student-led movement to document injustice across the city. Zora herself watched from her front porch, still bandaged, still bruised, but with a steadiness that surprised even her. She saw the veterans at attention, the students carrying clipboards, the reporters on the corner filming every sign taped to shop windows. For the first time since the mall incident, she realized that the humiliation she had endured was no longer hers alone to carry. Her pain had become a rallying point. The story was no longer about a stolen phone or a set of handcuffs. It was about dignity, power, and whether the truth could outlast the systems built to bury it. Vanessa stood behind her daughter, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. For years she had taught Zora that strength was not only found on battlefields, but in classrooms, kitchens, and streets. Now, she saw it unfold before her eyes. What once had been her burden to shield was now becoming their collective fight. That same afternoon, Brad Reynolds returned. The young guard who had first spoken up looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder before stepping inside. In his palm was a small thumb drive, its surface scratched, its importance enormous. He placed it on the kitchen table, his voice low but clear. "Everything I told you before, it's all here. Recordings, emails, policy documents. Management ordered us to profile. They trained us to look at skin color first." His hands trembled as he pulled back, as though the device carried heat. Vanessa nodded, sliding the drive toward Major Williams, who had been stationed at the house since the hospital discharge. The Major's face hardened as he inserted it into his laptop, scanning file after file. Each document confirmed Brad's words, directives instructing guards to monitor black teens more closely, security briefings coded with phrases that masked racial bias under corporate jargon. In one audio recording, an executive could be heard instructing managers to make sure shoppers feel safe by removing suspicious types quickly. Suspicious, in this case, was defined by appearance alone. Word spread fast. A group of Electromax employees reached out to the Jackson family's legal team. They too had endured years of internal pressure to comply with discriminatory practices. Some had been punished for questioning orders, demoted or reassigned for daring to treat all customers equally. With the scandal now public, they decided to risk everything. One woman, a former corporate trainer, revealed that the company's policies were not limited to a single mall or city. They were nationwide, quietly standardized across dozens of branches. Her testimony was a lightning strike. What had begun as one security guard's cruelty was now revealed as a corporate culture built on systemic discrimination. The files, the testimonies, the voices joining together formed a tidal wave of evidence. Major Williams recorded statements, cataloged files, and secured the chain of custody with military precision. Each new disclosure confirmed the same truth. This was bigger than Reeves, bigger than Karen, bigger than a single mall. Electromax itself was on trial, in the court of public opinion, and soon it would be in a court of law. For Zora, the revelations were both staggering and strangely comforting. What happened to her was not random humiliation, it was part of something much larger. And if it was larger, it could be dismantled. The breakthrough came when General Hayes, a respected figure in Washington, held a press conference. Cameras crowded the Pentagon steps as he declared that discrimination against military families, especially children of those who served, was not only immoral, but a national security concern. His words framed the issue in a way no corporate spin could counter. If the families of those sworn to defend the nation could not walk safely into a store, then the nation itself was failing its defenders. The statement exploded across media outlets, elevating the case from local outrage to a federal concern. Across the country, veterans groups staged rallies, marching with banners that read "Protect Our Families." Editorials praised Zora's courage and Vanessa's leadership. Even international outlets carried the story, framing it as a test of American justice. Electromax stock began to tumble, investors panicked, and board members scrambled for cover. The public tide was no longer just against a mall security guard. It was against a corporate empire that had built discrimination into its operating manual. But resistance arrived swiftly. Anonymous smear campaigns painted Zora as a troublemaker. Fake stories appeared online claiming she had a history of shoplifting, none of them true. Social media accounts spread doctored photos, attempts to twist her into the villain. Vanessa worked tirelessly with attorneys to debunk each lie, but she knew the damage was intentional. The goal was not to win truth, but to muddy it. The Jackson family home became a target. One night their porch light was shattered, the driveway sprayed with the word "liar" in jagged red letters. Another night they awoke to find their car tires slashed. Neighbors rallied to repair the damage, but the message was clear. Someone wanted them afraid. Calls came at odd hours, heavy breathing on the other end, followed by silence. Once, Zora answered by mistake, only to hear a low voice whisper, "Stop this, or you'll regret it." Yet every attempt to frighten them into retreat was met with defiance. Vanessa filed reports with the same composure she carried in military briefings. Veterans doubled their watch outside, making sure the house was never left unguarded. Local parents took turns driving Zora to school. Friends left meals on the porch. For every threat, the circle around them seemed to grow stronger. And Zora did something else. She opened a notebook and began to write. At first, it was only fragments, angry lines, short notes about the vandalism. But soon, it grew into something larger. She began documenting every incident with dates and details, capturing the evidence of intimidation in her own hand. She wrote not only about the fear, but also about the strength she saw in the people who stood by them. Her voice was clear, steady, unflinching. One night, Vanessa found her at the kitchen table, the light dim, her wrists still wrapped in bandages. Zora's pen moved quickly across the page, her brow furrowed in concentration. When her mother asked what she was writing, Zora looked up and said, "If they think they can scare us, I'll make sure the world knows exactly how they tried." The words carried a weight beyond her age. She was no longer just a victim, no longer just a daughter. She was becoming the chronicler of a fight that stretched far beyond their family. Her journal was not only testimony, it was prophecy. a living record that could not be erased, not by lies, not by vandalism, not by fear. Vanessa stood quietly behind her, watching the pen move, and felt something stir inside her chest. The alliance surrounding them, veterans, students, whistleblowers, generals, was powerful. But she knew the true force lay here, in her daughter's determination. The battle was being fought in press conferences and courtrooms, but its soul was being written, line by line, in Zora's own hand. The courthouse was filled to capacity. Reporters lined the back walls, their cameras poised, while local families, veterans, students, and neighbors packed the wooden benches. The air was charged with anticipation, as though everyone knew they were witnessing history being written. Zora sat at the witness stand, her wrists still faintly marked from the cuffs that had cut into her skin weeks earlier. She did not shrink from the moment. When the prosecutor asked her to recount what happened that day, her voice was steady. She described the laughter in Officer Reeves' voice as he told her no one would believe her. She described the way Karen planted her phone, the disbelief that turned into humiliation when strangers looked at her as if she were a thief. Each word carried the weight of not only her memory, but the dignity she refused to let them steal. Across the courtroom, Reeves sat stone-faced, his jaw clenched. He avoided looking at her, but his fists tightened at every word she spoke. Beside him, Karen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her performance of fragile tears a stark contrast to the confident woman who had once planted her own phone and summoned the officer with a lie. Some jurors shook their heads as the contrast between Zora's composure and Karen's theatrics grew starker. The prosecution introduced the mall security footage. The giant screen flickered on, showing the moment Karen slid her phone into Zora's shopping bag when she thought no one was watching. The footage captured Reeves smirking as he yanked Zora's arms behind her back, ignoring her pleas. The room fell silent. Then came the medical reports from the hospital. Doctors testified about the lacerations and bruises on Zora's wrists, the injuries consistent with deliberate tightening of handcuffs. Finally, whistleblower testimony filled the room with undeniable evidence. Brad Reynolds, his voice shaking but determined, revealed the recording of the meeting where managers ordered racial profiling. He explained how Reeves had been protected despite a history of excessive force complaints. Then, an Electromax corporate employee stepped forward, producing internal documents that showed a nationwide pattern of discriminatory practices. The documents had signatures from high-ranking executives, removing all doubt. By the end of the day, the defense sat deflated. Reeves' lawyer offered weak objections, but the pile of evidence grew higher than his words could reach. The silence of the courtroom was not emptiness, it was judgment. All that remained was the verdict. When the jury filed back into the room, every eye followed them. The forewoman stood, a folded piece of paper in her hand. The judge asked for the decision, and her voice carried with firm clarity. Officer Reeves was found guilty of violating Zora's civil rights, guilty of excessive force, and guilty of misconduct unbecoming an officer. The judge wasted no time in declaring his suspension permanent, his badge revoked, his career ended in disgrace. Reeves closed his eyes, as if the weight of the words crushed him all at once. His fists unclenched, and for the first time he looked smaller, stripped of the arrogance that once carried him through hallways with unchecked authority. Karen's verdict followed. She was convicted of false reporting, a crime the court emphasized was aggravated by her intent to weaponize race against a child. Her sentence was not prison but community service, mandated to work in outreach programs designed to build trust where she had once sown division. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. Her punishment was to serve the very communities she had once tried to harm. Then came the thunderclapped verdict against Electromax and the Westfield Mall. The jury ruled them liable for racial discrimination, negligence, and systemic misconduct. Damages were awarded not only to Zora, but in the form of a lasting legacy. The creation of a scholarship fund in her name to be used for students pursuing education in law, social justice, and civil rights. The decision ensured that what had begun as an act of humiliation in a mall would end as an act of empowerment for generations. The courtroom erupted in applause, though the judge's gavel tried to restore order. Families hugged. Veterans saluted, students cried. Zora sat quietly, her mother's arm around her shoulders. For Vanessa, it was not only a victory, but a vindication. Every sleepless night, every fight against corporate lawyers, every moment of fear had led to this. Reeves had been stripped of his authority, Karen unmasked, Electromax brought to its knees. Yet the most powerful image was Zora herself, her dignity intact, her courage shining brighter than any verdict. When they left the courtroom, cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions, but Vanessa simply held her daughter's hand and whispered, "You did this." Zora smiled faintly, knowing the truth. This was only the beginning. The changes came swiftly and visibly. Within weeks of the verdict, construction crews moved into the mall's security wing, tearing out the old banks of monitors and ripping down the walls that once echoed with Reeves' orders. The community watched in awe as the space transformed. By the time it reopened, the very room where Zora had been humiliated now bore a new sign in bold letters: Community Justice and Resource Center. Instead of screens tracking shoppers, there were bookshelves stacked with legal guides, flyers for youth mentorship, and contact numbers for pro bono lawyers. Volunteers staffed the front desk, greeting families not with suspicion but with open hands. Where intimidation once thrived, healing and advocacy had taken root. Zora became more than just a name in headlines. National organizations invited her to speak, and her calm poise captivated audiences. She received awards that celebrated her courage, yet she never let them turn her into a spectacle. She spoke about dignity, about fairness, about the power of truth. When Johns Hopkins offered her a scholarship, funded by the very program named after her, she accepted with gratitude and determination. For her, the opportunity was not just about her future, but about honoring every child who had been silenced before her. Vanessa's path also shifted. The Department of Defense recognized that her strength as a mother who had fought tirelessly in the public eye gave her credibility no title could replicate. She was promoted to lead a reform task force dedicated to protecting military families from discrimination across the country. In Pentagon conference rooms, where polished brass and sharp uniforms filled the air with authority, Vanessa's voice cut through with conviction. Generals who once dismissed concerns about bias now listened intently as she presented hard truths and demanded structural change. Her personal battle had armed her with more than medals. She carried scars that gave her authority no one could question. Because she was an expert interviewer, this is why Obama. The real measure of transformation arrived a year later, when the mall held the first Zora Jackson Scholarship Ceremony. The atrium was filled with families, teachers, and students carrying notebooks and dreams. Veterans stood in uniform, children clutched the hands of their parents, and local businesses hung banners of support. The mall, once remembered for injustice, now pulsed with hope. At the front stood Zora, just 16 years old, but with the composure of someone far older. She approached the podium with quiet confidence. Her wrists, faintly scarred, rested on the wood. She looked out across the crowd, not intimidated but steady. When she spoke, her voice carried across the hall. "This isn't about vengeance," she said. "It's about making sure the next child is safe. It's about making sure no one else is humiliated for the color of their skin. It's about building something better out of the pain we've endured." The room erupted in applause. Some cried, others clapped until their hands ached, but all of them felt the weight of her words. The same walls that had once witnessed cruelty were now echoing with the promise of justice. For those who had come to see her as just a girl, they left seeing her as a leader. Vanessa stood in the front row, tears glistening in her eyes as she watched her daughter shine. Pride, love, and respect passed silently between them. They had endured humiliation, threats, and nights that felt endless, but they had transformed that pain into power. and that power into a legacy. Zora's scarred wrists no longer symbolized what had been done to her. They now symbolized survival, courage, and the change she had helped bring to life. As she stepped down from the podium, applause still thundering, Zora reached for her mother's hand. Together they walked into a future that would always remember the fight, but never be defined by the fear.